Come on in. Pull up a chair. It's so good to have you here again for our daily session of stories around a warm fire with good friends. Welcome to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Today, we're going to be reading some great stories from some great writers that aren't yours truly. So, let's fall into these great tales and give these talented men and women the respect and the attention that they so deserve. This first story is from our dear friend Ambitious Gast, a longtime friend of the channel, and it's a classic that I know you all think quite highly of. It's called A Voice from the Vents. Enjoy. I remember when playing behind my house was an endless exploration of imaginative adventures that could only further inspire my 8-year-old mind. Many times I was a barbarian warrior, like Conan, lopping off hands with my enchanted tree branch. The evil beasts conjured up in my mind stood no chance against my strength and wit, my lust for action and romantic adventure. However, I now realize just how close my world was to intertwining with the Sumerian, his fiction. For many years, the tales of sword and sorcery described monsters of unfathomable terror. Oh, such only brute force and unwavering mind of a fearless warrior could encounter and hope to defeat them. I was not this warrior, yet my discovery of a hidden terror seemed to be destined for me to find. For when I wandered off the set path which led from mine to my grandparents' house, I stumbled across a shaded patch of forest with a small, murky pond at its center. The area was dead quiet, save for the crunching of dead leaves beneath my feet and the occasional nerve-wracking pop of breaking twigs. I remember a slight fog over the water, more like a vapor dissipating, as if the pond was boiling. Yet, being an ignorant youth, I reached down and touched the surface and felt it was very cold, so much so that I drew my hand back in surprise, only to begin violently wiping my fingers on my clothes, for the liquid was like some sort of sticky alcohol. With the commotion I made, I heard across the water a soft rustling that seemed to be heading around the pond in my direction, but I stopped once I glanced towards it. For all my fear of the sound, my eyes suddenly came across a shape in the center of the pond. It was like a pale, smooth limestone, yet from it came a small, delicate trail of bubbles, escaping from an unseen pocket of air. Stupidly, I started to lean forward, squinting for a better look. I fell, my body submerging in the cold burning of the foggy liquid. I desperately tried to place my feet on whatever ground I could find, but there was none. I kicked and thrashed towards the surface, not wanting to open my eyes for fear of the liquid blinding me. Suddenly, I felt one of my feet strike something hard. The limestone, maybe? But in response, there came a sound, a low grunt of some kind. The pond began to build up a slight current, and, as if returning the favor, a sharp pain hit my thigh. I screamed into the mysterious water, and put all of my effort into reaching the shore of what now seemed to be an infinite ocean. I was no longer Conan as I breached the surface. I was a child crying out for his parents, smothering from the fumes of this potentially poisonous body of a creature-infested water. I climbed out after what seemed an eternity of an unwaking nightmare, and refused to look back as I ran from the pond. I expected to hear the sound of a monster breaching the pond's surface, but the silence of the dark woods remained unbroken. The vapors of the dry liquid trailed behind me as I desperately made for the familiar path. When it was in sight, I felt the calmness of familiarity which caused me to slow my pace. The world was luminous with the summer evening, and the creatures of common knowledge went about their business, ignorant of what I had found. When I reached home, I wondered if I had only dreamed up another fantastic story in which I'd encountered the pond. There was no scent of the strange water, no more burning on my skin, but the fear in my heart returned as I looked down at my torn jeans and spied a coagulation of blood from a long scratch on my flesh. I hurried inside and tossed my clothes into the hamper, showering for good measure, unintentionally earning praise from my mother for being on top of my hygiene. I told my parents nothing about the pond or the scratch, but I couldn't completely hide my fearful glances to the window facing the edge of the forest during dinner. The question didn't come. All was normal within our house, which made me more and more at ease, as well as conscious of my illogical perception. The evening went on with my dad and I watching reruns of Star Trek, while my mom read one of her awful Amish-based novels in the lamplight. I look back on this time to comfort myself, given what was to follow. I was tucked into bed by my loving parents. Being an only child at the time, I was coddled quite a bit. The bedroom was alight with glow and dark stars, posters of Star Wars, shelves of action figures ready to defend me while I slumbered. The light of my aquarium and the shadow of the angelfish gliding on the wall eased me into a near doze, until the bubbles from the pump caused me to open my eyes in fear. Suddenly, as if responding to my fearful pondering, I heard a scratching in the vent near the right side of my bed. A soft clinking followed by breathing, as if something small was making a great effort to get through the grate. I was terrified. My hopes that my imagination from my playful excursions of the day had overtaken my senses were dashed. Yet the delusion refused to let loose its prisoner, which was my sanity. I knew I had to face it to prove its non-existence, so that logic could once again have dominion. "Hello?" I asked of the darkness. Immediately, the noise ceased, and in my mind's eye, I could see a rat scurrying away in fear of its discovery. But it was my contribution to this fable that was dismissed instead. "You found it, boy," came the whisper of a tiny creature behind the grate. My eyes welled with tears at the sound. I was about to call out to my parents when it continued. "All this time I tried to keep it hidden from the short nose, and a runt such as yourself seems compelled to find it and wake it up." The voice was irritated, yet it also contained fear in its reverence. "What was it?" I asked, in a trembling voice. My aquarium bubbled quietly, reminding me of the pale shape in the pond. "It is a manticore, one that has hibernated for many human lifetimes, but has ended far more. I was entrusted to watch over it by the one who placed it in the prison. You stirred it. Now it will soon awaken." As I rose up in bed, I forgot my fear of disturbing circumstances and speaking with hidden things. I knew what a manticore was. I knew it well enough to have it far from my mind to dream up during my woodland adventures, for the image of the creature caused real fear in me, though in a hypothetical sense. The image I had seen in books of monsters went through my brain and disturbed me anew. Now I realized that I had been scratched by the thing's relentless claws. Had I opened my eyes while submerged in the pond, I knew that I would have gone mad to see the shape within the burning fog. "What can I do?" I asked. It didn't respond, yet I could still hear it breathing in the vent. "Please, I didn't mean to wake it up," I whimpered. I was trembling beneath the bed sheets, which used to make me feel safe. Now I only felt cold and alone, guilty for bringing such a thing into this world. "You cannot put it back to sleep. It's been too long now, and it'll be hungry. You cannot hurt it with any weapon, for its flesh is invulnerable. It can eat you whole, and it'll leave no bones behind. Its roar is terrible, boy. Your mother, your father, will wake up to the sound of it, and will be taken by madness once it enters your home. It will devour your neighbors, all who dwell nearby, and no one will know what's happened to any of you." I fell out of my bed and onto the floor sobbing. I crawled to the vent and put my face down to it, without fear of what might happen. "What can I do?" I implored. "How can I kill it?" In the grate, I could see a tiny shape stirring within, 2 glimmers of silver light peering at me, and I could see the green flesh of a long, pointed nose. It was a goblin, small and mischievous looking, though at the moment the eyes looked sad and pitying. When it spoke for the final time, I sensed the want of a brighter circumstance. "If you wish to truly be the hero you pretend to be, you must slay it through its mouth." The eyes disappeared, and a soft, scrabbling shape faded into the darkness. I was alone with this frightening knowledge, and I had to make a choice. Should I return to my bed and risk waking up to the roar of the manticore, or did I face it that very night in the strange waters that it lay beneath? I was a child. I was scared, but I knew I couldn't let my family and my neighbors be devoured because of what I had done. I dressed, grabbed a flashlight and a small family picture propped up on the table next to my bed, then quietly went to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife from the rack. With my weapon in hand, I went out the back door to the swaying trees of a windy midnight. I started up the path with an empty mind, neither allowing terrible imagery nor doubting logic to hinder my strides. I wasn't brave, but I wasn't foolish. I simply was. The reality, or at least my perception of it, had been shattered into shapeless pieces of mirror that, no matter how well formed, could never show my reflection in its former naivete. I prayed that I wouldn't find the pond, but I knew for sure that I would. The shape would be there. I would have to go back into the water and somehow open the mouth of the manticore and shove my feeble knife into it. This was my plight. I was 8 years old, on an adventure in my favorite place to pretend, and I could feel a laughing mockery of my innocence when I left the path once more. There was no sound but the wind and the trees. A crescent moon and a star-filled sky watched me from afar. I held my family picture to my chest and watched the hills of dead leaves. The beam of my flashlight shone through the trees, who almost seemed lonely in this path. In true, this was a world left behind a long, long time ago, when fairies took flight and in the gardens of elves, dryads danced for satyrs piping tunes. Whatever creatures flourished in this pocket of time so close to my home were long since devoured by the manticore. Likely whatever force imprisoned the beast also sent it here to our plane, as well as having the courtesy of leaving a goblin behind to watch over it, no doubt. I finally saw the pond reflecting its murky grayness with my flashlight, and my soul cried out within me as a cold fear enveloped my body. There were no more vapors floating on the surface. Neither was there a pale shape below. It was still and empty. The thoughts now began to race, both logical and fantastical. It was gone. It was never there. I can return to my warm bed and forget about it. It will be there waiting for me in the midst of my parents' innards. I wanted to scream for all the emotions, but it was the manticore that screamed into the night, sending a terrible jolt through my body. My bowels cramped at the sight of the giant face of a human hovering 10 feet in the air. The paws of an enormous lion's body thudded to the ground, the wings on its back flapping a gust that almost made me topple over. The barbed, porcupine-like tail flicked violently left to right, taking out a tree with one careless swipe. The eyes were large and bulging, yellow with black gashes for feline pupils. When my eyes met that of the monster's, it screamed again in satisfaction at its discovery of its first meal after so long its slumber. I could see its 3 rows of teeth as it howled at me, and yet, somehow my only thought was, my parents are hearing this, and they're going to find out that I'm out of bed. They're going to look for me. They won't find me. I've been swallowed whole. When the manticore reached out to me, it stopped and gazed down at my tiny form and did something that finally snapped me out of my insane stupor. It grinned. The monster was grinning at my fear. The teeth were sharp and yellow. The stench of its breath broke through each of them and made me almost vomit. Stagnation of time, the willingness of its stomach acid to return to its labor. The manticore was ready to indulge itself. It breathed in through its nostrils, then opened its mouth and slowly came down over my head. Yet, somehow, instead of succumbing to terror, a white-hot hatred took over. I was offended at how weak it perceived me. I was irritated at how much of a bully this thing was. This freak of nature had thrown its weight around eons ago and eradicated the peaceful world in which I lived. I refused to let this happen again. Not to my family, my neighbors, and certainly not to me. I stepped on the first layer of its teeth and stabbed the knife into its tongue. It screamed and began to try to close its jaws on me, but I had already climbed further in and now sank my knife into the roof of its mouth. The beast thrashed its head, trying to sling me out, but I kept climbing further in, slicing and stabbing all the way through. I remember the barbarous man of action that I pretended to be, and I embraced it fully, burrowing deep into its throat, spitting blood from my own mouth as I climbed. By the sudden change in its equilibrium, I could tell it had fallen to the ground and was struggling against the pain. I pressed my feet against the back of its throat and shoved my knife deep into its skull. I couldn't penetrate it, so I began to cut upward as hard as I could. Its screams were deafening, but I knew that it could hear my laughter as I sliced and mangled without mercy. Suddenly, I was drowned in cold, burning water from the pond, along with fresh screaming as it mingled with the manticore's wounds. I lost my knife in the flood, but not my footing, or the family picture in my hand. I kissed it, then smashed the glass in the frame and shoved it into the open gash as hard as I could. The monster bellowed and suddenly began to whine pitifully. The thrashing ceased, and the water flowed inside until I was completely submerged. I began to swim out of the mouth, fearful of the teeth, but desperate to get out. My eyes burned horridly, and all the vision I had darkened from the night, so I felt my way past the teeth to the surface. Through the burning, I could make out the flashlight, which lay on the ground, and I swam towards it, fearing the claws of the beast seizing me and pulling me under. Suddenly there were small hands grabbing my arms and helping me out of the pond. It was the goblin, though I could barely see its shape. "You did it, boy! You did it! You slew the manticore!" I was confused. All the effort I put forth to hurt the creature still hadn't been enough to kill it. The goblin continued to bellow his claim, and I expected any moment that the thing would come back up and chomp us both. Yet the creature was silent. I could see now that it had plunged head first into the pond and drowned itself. It's really dead?" I asked. "Poisoned. The water is deadly to manticores that ingest it, which is why it was put here to sleep. But they can hold their breath for a long time. You made it drink the water to relieve the torture, and now its innards will burn away." I fell back and watched the star-filled sky. A meteor passed, and with it went my wish to always have this bravery that overcame my impossible fear. As the years progressed in my life, I found myself abandoning my imagination, my thoughts of heroism, but I always remembered the moment when I accepted my new reality at the edge of the pond. I always like to hear early stories by people like CIA Herpes or Ambitious Gas, when you can really tell that their writing is coming along and you can follow their journey as they get better and better with each tale. Speaking of our good friend CIA Herpes, this next one is by him, and it's about a boy who sees some demon crows circling a monk. The old monk looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun with his hands. The clouds looked strange, black and thick, curling like smoke above where he now sat on top of the mountain. "So it has started," he said. I heard him from farther down the trail, carrying a pail of water for us to drink. Back then, as a 7-year-old boy, I lived in the nearby village. I always wished to learn from the monk. They know secrets, after all. "Oh, Father," I said, dropping the heavy pails of water on top of the mountain, where the monk sat in his ochre robes, his legs crossed full lotus in the eternal symbol of meditation. "What are those clouds, do you think?" He didn't look up at me, but for a moment I thought he might not respond. "Boy, there are things in this world you don't know yet. The wonders of enlightenment, yes, but also the strange evil demons who rule the sky and torture the evildoers in Naraka. They see I am weak, and that I have not yet attained enlightenment. They come here to torment me, to see that I am reborn," the monk said, his voice wavering and cracking as he came to the last word. "They know I have failed. I have not attained nirvana." The old monk did look weak. His hands trembled, and his legs under his robes looked like thin, brittle sticks. His eyes watered constantly, drooping, the whites looking more like yellow jelly than sclera. But in the center of those eyes, I saw a blazing determination and a deep energy. "All beings know the horror of rebirth. Is that not true, old father?" I asked, sitting down beside him. He shook his head. "I will not," he said bluntly, his voice gaining strength and volume. I will not be reborn. This cycle must end. This is my last body. I swear it on the sky, on the trees, on the mountain that we sit upon. The demon will not win." The old monk had gone to a doctor. The doctor had looked at him, his sickly and jaundiced appearance, and had immediately begun running tests. "You have terminal liver cancer," the doctor said. "I'm sorry, but you will not live out the month. It has progressed too far." "So it has. So it has. All things must arise and pass away." "I can write you a prescription for," the doctor began, but the monk waved him off. "No medicine. Thank you for telling me this great secret, doctor, the secret of my death. Now I have time." After speaking these cryptic words, he got up and calmly walked out of the office, heading towards the deep forest and high mountains of his country from which he knew he would never return. The monk had told me this as we walked up the mountain to the final place of meditation. I'd cried, tears streaming down my cheeks. But who will teach the townspeople? Who will perform acts of compassion and spread wisdom when you are gone? We have no one else, old father. You're the last." The monk walked in silence for a moment, thinking deeply under the bright light of the sun. "You will, perhaps. We have always passed on wisdom from big hand to small, from old to young. Someone will come, I believe. People who want to obtain the highest wisdom are rare, yet they exist, even in a world so far gone." Strange sounds came from the sides of the trail. It didn't sound like animals, but rather like high-pitched screaming and laughter. I could catch glimpses of black, hateful eyes in the brush, but when I turned to look, they had already gone. "Do you see?" I whispered. The monk nodded slowly, not a trace of fear in his voice. "They are not here for you. They are here for me." "But why?" "They're demons, my son. Their joy comes from death, from pain and loss, and the greatest loss is the loss of enlightenment, of wisdom, of peace. They know this. Their instincts tell them, just like the cheetah knows which of the antelope is slow and hurt before the hunt even begins. They will not trouble you, but if you wish to turn and go, I will not hold it against you. This is my journey, not yours." "I will stay by your side until the end," I said, smiling up at him. He looked sad, but he still stood up straight and proud. Occasionally he would grab at his stomach and bend over, moaning. He would take a few deep breaths, and sweating and wavering slightly, he would return to the trail. But as I looked forward to where the trail ended, my breath caught in my throat. The sky had turned black over the peaks of the mountain. In the blackness, I thought I saw glimpses of eyes and a smile. Will they kill you, old father?" I asked it in my most trembling voice. He walked on in silence for a long time, without answering. We made the top of the mountain. I had never been so high before, and the beauty of the view took my breath away for a moment. I stood there, staring out for hundreds of miles, seeing the rolling hills turned into flat plains and oceans. Towns shone on the land below us, looking dark and tiny, the people like ants. But the blackness of the clouds and the strange demonic noises from the forest ruined much of the beauty for me. Without ceremony, the monk put down his meditation pillow in the middle of a patch of soft grass. He looked down at it, then he looked over at me. "I will not be rising again. You must return home alone after the end." "I will. You've shown me fearlessness. I will be like you. I'm not afraid of death or demons, just like you. I can get home by myself." "Your parents will worry," the monk said, but I shook my head. "This is more important. I'll stay by your side until the end. You will not be alone."
"I'm never alone. I walk the path of the Buddha. He is here, by my side, on the trail and above, selfless and free as the wind. I'll follow him out at the end, I hope. We will go together without self."
I didn't understand what he said, but I smiled all the same.
"Now I must sit and meditate. Time is short. Do what you will, my son. You were always a good boy, standing by my side, by the side of a man who is dying."
The lightning and hail began within minutes of him sitting down to meditate. I tried to take refuge under the great canopies of the tree, but the monk got pelted with hail, great balls of ice that smashed and cracked against the ground. I saw some hit him on the head, causing streams of blood to run down his face and soak into his robes. Yet he never reacted, but breathed slowly in and slowly out, concentrating his mind on the final goal. As the storm worsened, lightning began to strike the top of the mountain. The blasts felt like bombs, and the trees split apart under the force of the explosion. But the monk did not react. I moved further into the woods, but not so far that I couldn't see the monk. I stood there, huddled and shaking, wondering why I'd come so far, and yet when I looked at the clear, calm face of the monk, my doubt disappeared.
"He's alone, dummy,"
I chided myself when the terror grew too great.
"Would you leave him to die? Stay with him until the end. Let him know that at least one person cares for his life."
But the storm didn't end. It grew more intense, and from the darkness of the sky above, I saw many eyes looking down on the monk. They looked upon him with hatred and hunger, as if they wished to eat him alive. From the forest below, I heard many footsteps. There was great laughter, demonic and low. From the trees, I saw abominations emerge. On the trail and the paths they walked. I'd gone to the edge of the forest, but I could look down the mountain and still see the old monk. They looked mutated and sick, the demons below. Their skin had great gouges, blisters and cuts, maggots and pus pouring out from each wound. Some walked on 2 legs, others on 4, and they bit and clawed at each other as they walked, some snarling or shrieking, others laughing and chittering like hyenas on the prowl. The old monk, by this point, looked bloodied and hurt. The hail and the chunks of the trees from the lightning had hit his body over and over. From dozens of deep wounds, the blood trickled down his robes. But his head wasn't bowed, and he emanated peace. "He's bloodied, but his head is unbowed," I said to myself, thinking. It seemed to have great relevance, but I couldn't understand why. As the demons approached, the lightning began to strike closer and closer to the monk. The ground shook with each blast, and I feared the mountain would fall apart under the strength of the crash. The first row of demons had seen the monk. The bloodlust and loathing had showed from their eyes, and it made me scared. When the wind blew, a smell filled the area, like burning sulfur mixed with the odors of decomposing bodies. I took a step back into the forest, trying to hide myself as best I could. But as they approached, the monk opened his eyes. Light seemed to stream from within him, great waves of it that came from those eyes. And for the first time in his life, he must have experienced the greatest bliss. His eyes widened, and eternity seemed to pour from deep within him. Those eyes never moved, but they seemed to see everything. A small smile forced across his lips. For a moment, I felt like I looked not upon an old man, but a blazing pillar of light. "I have attained peace," he said, pulling a knife out of his robe and putting it to his throat. "Despite my dying and my sickness, I have attained peace. I will not be returning, never, to this world." And with a look of bliss beyond anything I'd ever seen, he slit his own throat and died. At the moment he died, the black clouds and thunder and demons receded, and I found myself standing
under a bright summer sky, alone with the corpse of a man who would never return.
I love the surrealist tones in that last story. It really makes me think, really makes my imagination work to see all the things that are being described there. I just love that. It's like a brain exercise. Moving right along, we go to another friend of the channel, Carbidex, with his story about how children are disappearing on the streets. The hissing of steam from the subway grates interrupted the silence of the evening. City lights cast long, menacing shadows over the pavement. Right in front of me, a missing child poster flapped in the breeze. It had been plastered over a lamppost, rain-washed, and barely clinging to it. I had seen that face before. Street vendors sold questionable food, with grease pooling in the grill tops. A thin wisp of smoke emanated from the cart, blending with the city fog. At that hour, only the brave or the foolish roam the streets. "I told you," a voice sneered, breaking me out of my reverie. I turned to see Marco, an old friend from high school. "Children go missing here every damn week." "And?" I glared. "And nothing," he laughed, taking a drag from his cigarette, the orange glow illuminating his face in a sinister dance. "Just stating the facts." I'd come back to the city after years abroad. Upon my return, the rumors had started. Whispers about children who'd vanished into thin air, never to return. The rumors were suffocating, and their impact on the community was palpable. "Third kid this month," a woman murmured to her friend as they hurried past, clutching their bags tighter, casting suspicious shadows at anyone who dared to make eye contact. "I heard it's a man," said a homeless guy, propped up against a brick wall, a tattered hat placed in front of him with meager coins. "Tall, wears a hat, stalks him, he does." Marco scoffed, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Urban legend. Every city's got one." "Then explain the disappearances," I retorted. He shrugged. "Maybe they ran away. Maybe it's a trafficking ring. Who knows? It's the city. Things happen." My fingers itched to slap the indifference from his face, but the seed of fear had been planted. I started seeing the missing children posters everywhere. Lampposts, bus stops, the mouths of alleyways. One evening, while walking through the park, I saw a group of kids playing. The setting sun cast a golden hue over their innocent faces, their laughter echoing, forming a dark contrast to the tales of horror that loomed large. In the distance, a silhouette stood watching, a man in a hat. I squinted, trying to get a better look, but the figure melted away, almost as if he had never been there at all. The fear grew. Every time I'd heard a child's laughter, my heart would race. Every shadow, every whisper, every creak became a harbinger of doom. The nights were sleepless, the weight of a dark city, secrets that pressed down on me from everywhere. One night I was taking a shortcut through an alley, the familiar sound of children's laughter sending shivers down my spine. I strained my ears, trying to locate the source. It seemed to be coming from an old, dilapidated building, its windows boarded up, a relic from the long-ago past. Against my better judgment, I approached, feeling an inexorable pull. As I neared the entrance, the laughter grew louder, more distinct, but eerily off somehow. It sounded distorted. The front door creaked open, revealing a dark hallway. From within, the giggles continued. My feet moved of their own accord, leading me deeper into that abyss. Each step echoed a rhythmic beat that only seemed to amplify the terror coursing through me. A dim light at the end of the hallway beckoned. The room it led to was bathed in an otherworldly glow. At the center stood a massive mirror, its ornate frame decorated with grotesque faces. The reflection, however, was not my own. Instead, the faces of the missing children stared back, their eyes hollow, their smiles twisted in eternal torment.
"Help us," they whispered in unison. From the shadows, a tall figure emerged, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over his face. "Another one for my collection," he mused, his voice dripping with malevolence. I tried to move, tried to scream, to do anything, but my feet were rooted to the spot, paralyzed by an unseen force. As the figure approached, the room grew colder, the children's faces in the mirror growing more desperate. The man's hands reached out, inches from my face, and suddenly a blinding light filled the room, a cacophony of sound, sirens, shouts, the distant wails of a child. The spell was broken. I turned and ran, and never looked back. But the nightmare was far from over. I burst into the open night, gulping in the chill air, the neon city lights blurry through my tears. The horrifying vision in the building was imprinted on my mind. Those children, their faces warped with terror, the tall man reaching out for me. The sirens grew louder, reverberating through the empty streets, only to drown out when I stumbled into Marco, a concerned expression replacing his usual indifference. "What happened?" he panted, grabbing my shoulder. "I followed you when I saw you enter that building." But I could only point back to the cursed structure, my voice a mere whisper. "He's in there." Marco's eyes darted to the building, then back to me. Without a word, he pulled me away, ushering me towards the brighter parts of the city, away from the echoing laughter and the haunting shadows. We found ourselves in a 24-hour diner, the sterile fluorescent light seeming alien after the night's events. I narrated everything, and Marco listened intently, occasionally sipping his coffee. "You're lucky to have gotten away," he muttered, tapping his fingers nervously on the counter. "There are legends, you know, of the man in the hat. They say he traps souls, feeds on the innocent." "But why children?" My voice wavered, and the passing waitress shot me a worried glance. Marco sighed. "Children are pure, their energy's untainted. And urban areas, they're hunting grounds, filled with distractions, making them easy to prey on." Dawn approached as we decided to notify the police. Their skepticism was palpable, yet the consistent disappearances provided some weight to our story. They agreed to inspect the building. What they found sent shivers down my spine, and even the most seasoned officer was rattled a little. Inside that room was the mirror, the atmosphere thick, stifling. The walls were lined with old photographs, each displaying a missing child, their eyes vacant. In the center stood the grand mirror, but it was ordinary now, reflecting nothing but the grim faces of the officers. However, the most disturbing discovery was a room concealed behind thick drapes. Inside, a maze of strings connected pinned pictures, notes, bizarre symbols, each thread intertwined, leading to a single image in the center, a sketch of a man in a hat. Below it, a chilling note: "The city feeds, and so shall I." News spread like wildfire. The city was in an uproar. Vigilante groups formed, vowing to hunt down the man in the hat. Parents held their kids close, and the night saw the streets deserted. Weeks turned into months, but the city's palpable fear remained. The disappearances halted, but the memories persisted, a shadow over every home. One evening, as rain lashed the window panes, I received a call, an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A raspy voice, dripping with malice, whispered, "You escaped me once, but the city never forgets." Frozen, I could only listen as soft, distorted laughter echoed in the background. I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding. The man in the hat wasn't done. The city's nightmare had only just begun. Despite the overwhelming dread, there was a determination that burned within me.
I couldn't let this malevolent entity continue his reign of terror. Teaming up with Marco and a group of other survivors, we decided to delve deeper, to unearth the truth behind this urban legend. Our research led us to an ancient myth, stories of an entity that existed in the shadows, thriving on fear. The more that we feared, the stronger they became. Legends spoke of mirrors as portals, realms where these beings would trap souls, feasting on their essence. We needed to destroy the source of the power. We needed to destroy the accursed mirrors. Armed with tools and determination, we made our way to the building. The entrance seemed more foreboding than before, its dark void beckoning us, challenging us. Inside, the silence was oppressive. The mirror room awaited, the large glass surface reflecting our anxious faces. Taking a deep breath, I swung my sledgehammer. The impact sent ripples across the city. Every street, every home, every heart felt that first strike. As cracks appeared, the trapped souls began to break free. The city, once cloaked in darkness, began to breathe again. But it wasn't over yet. From the mirror's depths, the man in the hat emerged, his form more terrifying than any legend could convey. Our final battle had begun. The room's temperature plummeted. Our breaths were visible, forming vaporous clouds in the freezing air. The man in the hat moved with unnatural speed, a mere blur as he lunged at us. Marco and the others tried to restrain him, but it was like fighting a hurricane. His sheer force was overwhelming. His eyes were pools of infinite darkness locked onto mine, and I felt a pull, an overwhelming desire to succumb. Those eyes were a promise of peace, an end to constant dread, but beneath that, a current of malevolence lurked. "Join the others," he hissed, his voice echoing with the pain and sorrow of all his victims. But I wasn't ready to give up. Remembering the research, I shouted, "Don't look into his eyes. He draws strength from our fear." Distracting him with makeshift weapons and tools, we circled the mirror, chanting an ancient spell we had discovered during our research. The room quaked. The very foundations of the building groaned under the force. The mirror's cracks began to grow, each fracture emitting a piercing scream, the collective voice of the trapped souls demanding release. The man in the hat, his strength waning, tried to retreat into the mirror, to escape the onslaught, but our chants grew louder, drowning out his anguished cries. With one final surge of energy, the mirror shattered, sending shards flying in all directions. The room was engulfed in blinding light, a force so potent it threw us back. As the light dimmed, we slowly got to our feet, taking in the aftermath. The man in the hat was gone. In his place was a pile of ashes and a worn-out hat lying on the floor, marking the end of that ancient terror. The walls, once lined with haunting photographs, now displayed blank frames, their tormented occupants finally free. Exhausted, we made our way out, the first rays of dawn painting the city in hues of hope. The streets, for the first time in months, echoed with genuine, joyful laughter. Children played without fear, families reunited. The weight of the dark past slowly faded away. News of our victory turned us into local heroes, but we knew the truth. The city's true heroes were its inhabitants, their collective spirit and hope being the real force that banished the evil. Yet, the city bore the scars, reminders of its tormented past. The once abandoned buildings became a memorial dedicated to the lost souls, ensuring the city would never forget. Years went by, life moved on, but every now and again on quiet nights, when the city heartbeat slows, whispers rise of a time when shadows held power, of brave souls who fought back, and of a man in a hat whose reign of terror is no more. However, urban legends have a way of persisting, tales passed down from generation to generation, and while the city had fought off one darkness, who's to say what other horrors lurked in its depths,
just waiting for their time to rise.
Such a good story. I may have to track them down and see if they've written anything else that I could read, since I really like their writing style. I'd love to see more. This next one is by Strange Accounts, and I might have to track them down too, see if they've written anything on par with this next one. It's about a murderous doll in the woods named Clickity Clackity, and it's one of my favorite stories, and I hope it's one of yours. I know it sounds silly, but has anyone ever heard this old poem about the Clickity Clackity? I don't know if it's just something from my small town that they kept alive or what, but I've been trying to do some research about it for the last few weeks. I haven't come up with much, and I'm looking for help. Honestly, at this point, I'm really begging for someone who has some information on this thing to step forward. But this is the poem I'm talking about. In these woods there lives a puppet. It sits and watches all who pass, with eyes of coal and teeth of rust, with skin crackling and full of crust, with wiry limbs, brittle as spent glass. It moves with subtle creaks and cracks. So if you're ever in the woods and see a puppet sitting near, do not look at it, no matter your fear. Just pretend you're okay. That's truly all I can say. In these woods, there lives a puppet. For some context, I live in the southern edge of Wisconsin. My family has always been pretty savvy when it comes to camping, and it was a big thing for my brother Paul and I growing up. We always had fun during family camping trips. But flash forward 20 years, and my parents have since passed on. There was a bad car accident, and the loss hit us unexpectedly. So, as a little remembrance trip, my brother and I had planned a final journey up into the woods that our family had frequented. It's up near the town of Clements, Wisconsin. It's where my family had always camped, but this time we were going in deeper into the woods, just to have a little extra privacy from the normal campground tenants. Plus, we were planning on getting a little drunk, so we didn't want any officers kicking us out. So, we made our plans. We were going to meet at 3 p.m. on Friday afternoon in the parking lot of the Clements Park campground, after which we'd head up north for a couple of hours. We'd found a decent spot in a clearing through Google Map, and we wanted to check it out. After all was said and done, the plan was to head back to our cars on Sunday afternoon. It was just a dumb, drunk, grieving kind of weekend getaway. We both wanted to talk things through, but neither of us could really be described as the going through armchair therapy sort of people. This is just how we handled things. But once Friday came around, things immediately went south. I'd parked my car in the run-down dirt lot of the Clements Park around 2:30. There were a few scattered cars of other campers littered around the dirt field, but nothing really of note. In a way, I'd felt relieved that I wouldn't have to exchange pleasantries with any old family friends. But although I didn't see any familiar people, I did see familiar faces. The trees that had stood tall since I was a kid still remained in their proper places. They held on rebelliously firm to their plots and were left untouched by time. If anything, they had appeared larger to me that day. They had loomed over me with an intensity that I hadn't felt in years. Either they had grown larger, or I had felt much smaller. With a deep breath, I took in the strong, nostalgic smell of the cypress and pine trees that filled the woods. It had always amazed me that the memory could be triggered so heavily with scent. The smell of fresh trees and dirt had taken me back to simpler times of life, when you entrusted your whole being to the care of others, when you were so little that your parents had seemed unstoppable by the forces of nature. You felt carefree because your parents could protect you. You never had to worry about yourself. Now that I was an adult, I knew that whole premise was faulty from the start. When death arrives, it arrives. It doesn't matter how much experience or wisdom you have. It has always, and will always, take what it wants. After a few minutes, I checked my phone and saw 2 unread text messages from Paul. He wrote that he was going to be a few hours late due to work, but told me to just go ahead without him. He said he'd meet me at the clearing sometime in the evening. I remember feeling disappointed in him. I know it wasn't his fault. He had a rough job. But this was supposed to be our time together. Our time to BS and get everything off our chest. I knew that, at the end of the day, there was nothing I could do about it. I just thought, whatever, and kept moving about with our plans. I walked behind my rusted little Honda Civic and popped open the trunk. What was inside my beaten-up sedan was worth more to me than my entire life's work. Right in front of me lay the same beaten-up rucksack that my dad had always taken with us. When he passed, my brother and I found all his camping gear still prepped and ready to go in the garage. At that point, we hadn't camped together for at least a decade. As a man, I held back tears as we found it. I think Paul had too. "Hey, Dad," I remembered saying as I picked up the heavy bag. "We're going on another trip together. Paul will be here soon." I looked towards the dirt path leading deeper into the woods and knew it was going to be one hell of a trek forward. It was pretty well known in our town that the trees in Clement's woods weren't exactly easy to travel through. There were thick patches of dry rotted tree limbs that had entangled and knotted around each other. One bad foot placement, and you'd end up snapping more than just tree limbs. With that in the back of my mind, I started my journey. The first thing you have to pass through is the standard campsites. They were full of beat-up trailers and half-assed tents. We called most of the trailers out there the regulars. They pretty much lived out there during the summer. They were good people, just a little odd. Once you got past most of them, you finally hit the start of Clement's Trail. It's less of a sanctioned path and more of a dusty foot trail. Years of fishermen coming and going had created a thin line of dirt that my family had enjoyed walking through for well over a decade. My brother and I walked down that exact path time and time again with our parents. It was basically a mile loop around a lake that happened to find itself surrounded by jack pines and red cedars that had made up the bulk of Clement's ecosystem. Past that was relatively untouched land. Now, was it legal for us to camp out past the sanctioned areas? Probably not. But what conservation officer would head several hours into the woods on a hunch there might be some buffoons grieving out there? So I pressed forward, continuing northward as I went into the depths of the tree line. Before I knew it, the Clements campground were out of sight and out of mind. During my hike, I used the sun as my marker and kept a good pace. I was actually a little ahead of schedule without having to keep pace with Paul. Incredibly, it was just over an hour of me walking due north that I started noticing something. There was this odd creaking noise coming from the distance just beyond me. It didn't sound like much of anything at first, just kind of like a tree cracking in the breeze. But when it kept happening, always the same distance away and always directly behind me, I started to get an odd feeling creeping up against the back of my mind. Yet every time I turned around to look at whatever was making that noise, I'd see the gentle swaying of green leaves overhead and the sand-colored trunks of the cedar trees, and nothing else. So every time I got that odd feeling running up my spine, I'd turn around and see nothing, then just keep marching on. This happened over and over again. It wasn't until I got to the clearing that something else popped into my head. I hadn't heard a single bird call that entire walk. Aside from the creaking of tree branches and the whistling of the wind, it had been dead quiet. But once again, I pushed it out of my mind. I shifted my focus to setting up the campsite for Paul and I. The clearing we had chosen was perfect. It actually looked better in person than it did on the overhead view from online. It was an almost perfect circle of grass, surrounded by a dense woodline. You could see the sun overhead, casting its dim glow from just over the top of the green canopy. I relaxed my mind a bit, now that I had gotten safely to our makeshift campsite. I went through the mental checklist of everything I had to prepare for the night. I started with the fire. I collected a few big stones that littered the forest floor and
formed a little rock pit in the dead center of the clearing. Shortly after that, I made a big pile of dry firewood that I had found scattered around the ground. I did my best to fill the fire pit with the best wood I could find, and tried to spark the tinder with my dad's fire starter. The fire starter went off without a hitch, and it was just in time for the evening sun to start cresting over the horizon. Even though I felt a little rushed setting up the campsite on my own, there was something relaxing about focusing on a single task. I wished Paul was with me, but part of me needed some silence to sort out my own thoughts. The fire provided enough light for me to set up the 3-man tent without issue. Before long, I was sitting by the fire, getting ready to open up the cooler and have a drink. That's when I finally got the text from my brother. "Hey, just FYI, I just got here. I'll be there in about 2 hours." I know a lot of you probably think hiking in the woods in the dark is stupid. You're right, we aren't the brightest tools in the shed, but we had an oversized ego for our capabilities. We'd been hiking and camping on our own for so long that it felt like second nature to us. I just texted him back with my thumbs up and fished out a drink. I sat my back against a broken cedar trunk near the fire and looked at my handiwork. "Here's to you, Mom and Dad," I muttered, before having a sip of my drink. Before I knew it, the cans had gathered next to me, and my eyes had gotten heavy. My eyes were half closed when I heard the same clinking noise I'd heard earlier. It was just outside the clearing, in the darkening woodline. My eyes drifted towards the edge of the trees and focused in on something directly across from me. There in the darkness of the sunless forest was a vague shape of something. It was barely noticeable in the shadows. It stood about 4 feet tall, and it was facing me. I slowly leaned myself forward off the tree trunk, my eyes fixated on the small, dark form. I was expecting it to turn and run away from me. It wouldn't have been the first time that I'd been spooked by a deer in the night. I thought to myself that any second now I'd hear the skittering of the deer hooves as they scampered back into the woods. But that's not what happened. As my eyes were focused on the little shape, it started to walk towards me. And by walk, I mean walk. Even with it being cast in shadow, I could tell that it had the frame of a small child. It was deathly thin and gaunt. It moved with a sense of weightlessness to it. The moment that it passed into the camp's clearing, the fire licked its face with light. Even through my drunken eyes, I could see what it was. It was the face of an old wooden marionette. I felt my heart lurch up in my throat. My body had instantly skipped the fight-or-flight response and went straight into freeze. I could no more lift a finger of my hand. All I could do was watch and examine the puppet's features. The wood was old and weathered, cracks and chips layering its pale skin. The eyes themselves were dark and empty, and the mouth was just a gaping hole full of rusted metal false teeth. It had what appeared to be human hair matted over its wooden scalp. It was just staring at me. Time passed, and it just kept staring. I worked up enough courage to slowly slide my hands towards my flashlight. I slowly aimed the bulb towards the thing at the edge of the camp and flipped the switch. Immediately, the puppet shot its hands up in the air and jittered its way towards me. Loud cracking and popping of aged wood filled the campsite. Its feet had glided its way over the forest floor as if it were floating, its knees bounding high up in the air with every mocking step. The clattering sound of wood on wood jangling in the empty void of darkness still haunts me. I dropped my flashlight and fell into the fetal position, completely curling up. My subconscious told me that I was already dead, and my body had totally given up in response. I counted the seconds in my head, waiting for whatever nightmare was about to befall me. But it didn't. I lay on the forest floor in a tight ball for God knows how many minutes. Eventually, I worked up the courage to take a glance at my tormentor. Through my fingers, I peered into my campsite, praying that the thing would be gone. But the puppet was still there. It was now halfway between the fire and me. The wind was blowing against its hardened skin, creaking its body ever so slightly with every gentle gust. Out of its mouth came a light clicking noise, almost like an infestation of woodworms, all calling out. What do I do? I remember repeating in my head, what do I do? Then I remembered the poem from when I was a kid. I remembered what it said. Just pretend you're okay. So I slowly sat up and kept the puppet in my peripheral vision. It turned to face me, but I did my best not to pay attention. You're at camp. Act like you're at camp, I silently recited to myself. I noticed that the fires of the fire pit had begun to dim. I needed to stock the pit again before the light went out completely. I looked over to the large stock of dry wood I'd collected earlier. I thanked God that I'd been smart enough to make a pile before sitting down for the night. The timber couldn't have been more than 10 feet away from me, but when I went to take a step towards the dry wood, my legs nearly gave out from under me. I was shaking bad. I heard the puppet begin to creak its way back up behind me. Maybe it noticed my fear. Maybe it knew I wasn't acting right. My intuition was flaring up in my mind like red-hot coals, that this thing wasn't just something I could run from. I had to play the game. Get the firewood. Don't acknowledge it. Just get the firewood. I straightened myself up and walked as casually as I could over to the bundle of fallen tree branches and limbs. I picked up a large handful and turned around. The marionette was standing just behind me, its coal-black eyes looking at my face. The clicking noise that was escaping its mouth sent a nearly uncontrollable fear through my body. But I pressed on. I walked in a straight line towards the fire pit, narrowly missing the wooden body of the doll. I took a knee to be near the warm flames and dropped the wood down next to me. Handful by handful, I placed the branches in the pit. The creaking of the doll had made its way over to my side as I stoked the flames. I glanced down at my thigh as the doll placed its thin, rotten hand against me. At that moment, I wanted to jump up and run away as far and as fast as I could, but instead I ignored that feeling. I ignored it as the tears welled up in my eyes. I took a stand near the fire and gathered my strength. I closed my eyes and took one last breath of night air before walking over to the tent. As soon as I walked into it, I zipped the door closed behind me. I saw the silhouette of the puppet standing right on the other side of the plastic sheeting, illuminated by the fire behind it. I finally cried. In hushed tones, I cried as long as I could remember. I went to look at my cell phone, let my brother know not to come down there, to tell him to go back to his car and get the conservation officer out here as soon as he could. But when I reached for my pocket, it hit me. I'd left my phone outside near the broken tree stump. I glanced back out at the shadow just outside my tent. It was facing me. It felt like it could see me through the thin layer of fabric that lay between us. I tried to gather up my courage to walk outside my tent and grab the phone, but I couldn't. I just sat there in my tent till I heard footsteps walking up to the campsite. "Hey, Jules, you up?" I stayed silent as Paul called out to me. "Sorry I'm late, but..." "What the hell is that?" he gasped. I heard the panic in Paul's voice. I watched the shadow as the puppet turned to face him. Its arms and legs jerked violently in the air. Paul turned as fast as he could and ran out of the clearing. The puppet followed him with impossible speed. It glided, its dangling, flailing limbs in the air as it began its chase. Not even a minute later, I heard a horrified yelp, then complete silence. I stayed in the tent all night, numb, broken, defeated. I just continually ask myself why I didn't say anything, why I didn't do anything. By the time morning came, I had left camp, picking up my phone and trying to dial Paul over and over again. There was never an answer. I left everything I brought in that exact spot. I never went back for it. I left those woods in a half daze that I've never recovered from. Before I knew it, I was back in the campground. I contacted the officers in charge of the area, and they conducted a search. They refused to listen to anything I had to say about what I'd seen. But the thing is, they didn't just dismiss it like I was crazy. It was like they'd already known what had happened and had refused to acknowledge it. We never found my brother. I could never take another walk in those woods either. I left the searching up to the police and the local volunteers. But what I can do is ask a question. Does anyone know anything about the old Clickity Clackity story? Almost time for so long there, kids. But we're going to finish out strong with a story by M. Clark 77 talking about a strange place that we all visit sometimes, an odd place, a dark place. Enjoy.
Are you really that afraid of the basement? My boyfriend asked, almost casually, putting on his button-up shirt. I glared back at him. You're seriously going to bring this up now? I'm getting ready for brunch, I said grumpily, pulling on my bra. He shrugged apologetically. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I just want to know why, especially if it's such a big issue. We can talk about it whenever you want, but I'd really like to talk about it eventually. His tone was calm, filled with sincere concern. I sighed. I felt my annoyance slip. I'd been avoiding the subject for so long. I really didn't want to bring it up, but Timothy had been so great. We'd been living together for over a year now, and he'd been very patient with me and my phobia of dark places. I don't just mean I'm afraid of the dark. I mean I go into full-on panic attack mode and start tearing up the walls with my bare hands and fingernails and teeth if I even get closed into a dark place. It makes going out at night or doing anything normal, like going to the cinema or the planetarium or a bar or a club, very difficult. I have a nightlight in every room in my apartment, and so plenty of backups, plus the flashlights, the candles, the lighter, pound of fresh batteries of all sizes. Of course, my smartphone can also function as a flashlight. I could go on, but suffice to say, I'm surrounded by as much light as possible. This was also why we were meeting Tim's parents for brunch in broad daylight, and not for dinner. Never dinner. I didn't leave the house once it got too close to sunset. I mostly drive wherever I need to go. Taking public transport is too risky, and I don't travel very much or very far. I also can't go into a bathroom that has no natural light and nothing but motion sensor-based lights. If they go out for just a few seconds, my heart races, my blood boils from fear, and my lungs burn with panic. I scream and run, crying usually until I'm back in the light. I'm very lucky to have Tim around. Unlike my previous boyfriends, he never made snide remarks about my phobia, even when it disrupts his schedule. His effortless patience was a stark contrast to my previous relationships. I'd never seen him so much as raise his voice. I slowly sat on the edge of the bed. Okay, I'll tell you why. Right now, actually, if you'd like. I'd rather just spit it out. We have a few minutes, and it's not a very long story anyway. Timothy quickly pulled on his sock and came to sit next to me. I looked at him and then looked back down at the bed. I've never told this to anybody, but the reason I'm so afraid of the dark, of being alone, is because of what happened to me in the basement when I was 10 years old. I paused, and Tim took my hand. His fingers were rough and warm. I'd never had issues with the dark or the basement or anything like that before. One day my mom asked me to go down and fetch the laundry from the dryer. So I've been down in the basement of this house 1,000,000,000 times, and I think nothing of it at all. The door creaks loudly, just like normal as I open it. I lazily walk down the steps and was busy messing around with my new Walkman when I suddenly heard the door slam shut behind me. I yelled and was plunged into darkness, so pure I thought I'd gone blind. I groped in the dark for the light switch. I heard it click as the light bulb buzzed to life noisily. As I spoke, I could feel my heart begin to accelerate. I could picture that basement now, that bare light bulb. My hand shook. Tim noticed this and began to caress my hands comfortingly. I continued. The basement wasn't that big or fancy. Nothing but bare concrete. We used it to store some old furniture and photo albums. Of course, we kept our laundry down there, too. I was a bit spooked by the door slamming, so I decided to get the chore over with fast. However, as my bare foot left the last step and touched the cold concrete floor, the light bulb glowed. It glowed so brightly that it burst. I screamed from fright, and I was just plunged into darkness again. It was so quiet that the distant sound of my parents or brother now extinguished. All I could hear was my own breathing. I paused again to catch my breath. It's been a long time since I told this story. All the memories that came with it filled me with terror. I moved in the direction of the laundry. I waved my hands in front of my face, but I couldn't see anything. I knew that there was a flashlight in the drawer of the desk next to the dryer. I took a few tentative steps, expecting any minute that I would feel bright pain as it exploded through my hip as I bumped into the desk. I never did, so I started taking bigger steps. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I realized that something was horribly wrong. I should have been on the other side of the room by now. A few steps after that, I should have been on the other side of the wall. Before I knew it, I was running. No, I was sprinting. I was hoping to be lucky enough to slam hard into the wall. It would prove my nightmare was a fake, but the wall never came. I ran through cold darkness. Then I heard a voice. Soft whisper. It was the voice of a man. There's nothing abnormal about his voice at all, but it gave me goosebumps. He warned me. He warned me never to return to the dark. He warned me to never tell anyone. My lips trembled, but I continued, my voice shaky. By then, I was beyond fear and incredulity. How could this be possible? Where was I? I yelped and shielded my eyes because it was suddenly blindingly bright, and I felt really cramped, like the room had just shrunk. Then strong hands were grabbing me and lifting me. I found myself being pulled from the wall. Tim's eyebrows shot up into his hairline at this point, but he remained quiet. We still have no idea how, but some men had heard a noise, and once they'd seen me, they rescued me immediately. They found me in a well that was hundreds of miles from my house, from that damn basement. I paused again, rubbing my temples with the tips of my fingers. I had to go to therapy, and no one could ever explain anything. Like I said before, I never mentioned what really happened to anyone. I didn't know whether I was more afraid of people thinking I was crazy, or if I was really more afraid of that voice. All I said was that I blacked out on my way downstairs. The therapist said I may have gone into a fugue state or something, which basically means that they don't have a goddamn clue what the hell happened to me. I continued to go to therapy for years and years, but it never helped. I felt I could never tell anyone the truth. Anyway, it all ended up in the papers, and my family and I had to move to a whole new town. After that, it was just kind of swept under the rug. People stopped asking questions. My parents never bring it up. They pretend it didn't happen. I like to do that too. So now that I've told you, I don't want to hear another word about it. If you tease me or prank me, so help me God, I'll dump your ass. I was trying to make a joke to help break the tension, but I could feel myself shaking more and more as I recounted the story. It had been some time since I'd thought about that traumatizing day. I felt tears from the corners of my eyes, but quickly blinked them away. Tim sat silently, his expression one of sympathy and concern. Wow, I had no idea. That sounds really horrifying. I completely understand your fear now. I'm feeling a bit less fond of the dark myself. He kissed me lightly on the forehead and rubbed my arm. I looked at him in disbelief. You don't think I'm crazy? You believe me? He smiled warmly. Of course I do. I can totally believe this universe is full of strange, unexplainable, sometimes horrifying things. He paused and looked me in the eye. But are you still okay for brunch with my folks? We can always reschedule, get McDonald's, watch some DuckTales or something. I smiled at him and chuckled. It's tempting, but no, we've booked a table and everything. Besides, it's too short notice now to cancel. Let's get going, okay? I feel okay. It was a long time ago. Tim glanced at me in a way that showed he was wholly unconvinced, but he yielded. All right, my dear. I'll just take the trash down quickly. Meet you downstairs. A few minutes later, I had my makeup on and was waiting downstairs on the ground floor. Tim had left ahead of me to take the trash to the refuse bin in the basement, and I'd expected him to be waiting for me already. But he wasn't there. I frowned, confused. Was he still downstairs? Why was he taking so long? I tried to keep my panic in check, but as the minutes ticked by, my heart began to thump loudly. No. There's no such thing as the dark place. There's no such thing as the monster in the basement. I stammered to myself softly as I tried to force the panic back down into the recesses of my stomach. He's I couldn't end that thought. What if by telling him the truth I'd put him in danger? The voice had said not to tell anyone. I thought that it would only be angry at me. But now, I'm starting to think otherwise. My blood was electrified with terror as I took a small step towards the stairs. The stairway was curved so that the door was hidden. I cranked my neck and peered around the corner. The large metal basement door was shut. Tim, is everything okay? My voice shook slightly as I spoke, but it was firm and loud. Silence pressed against my ears. I pulled my phone out of my bag. With the tap of a button, a small but bright flashlight switched on and illuminated the hallway. I turned the flashlight towards the stairs. With shaking hands, I took a step forward, started to descend. I halted after 3 steps. I felt dizzy now. Tim, this isn't funny. I'm really freaking... Then I heard him. Kara, I tripped and hit my head. I heard him groan in pain. I think I twisted my ankle. I really need some help. My fear instantly dissipated. Tim was hurt badly. His voice sounded really worried. If he'd been unconscious this whole time, he'd need serious medical attention. Shit, why had I waited so long to go check on him? Of course, there was no such thing as monsters. I hurried down the basement stairs and grabbed the door handle as I pulled it open. Complete, utter darkness pressed up against my eyes. I felt an unnatural coldness in the air. The basement door swung back and slammed into me so hard I felt myself fly through the air. I hit the ground hard and yelled with pain and surprise. The impact knocked my phone out of my hand and I heard it smash off as the light went out. What the hell? I stammered, my head swimming with confusion. Timothy, I whispered into the pure darkness. I was sitting on the hard, damp floor, which was the only other thing I could sense, besides the horrendous cold, my soft sobs and the musty smell. Then a gloomy light bloomed to life. My jaw dropped open in horror. It couldn't be possible. There, many yards in front of me, too far to be possible, a single bare light bulb was hanging. Its light was cold and small. It looked almost exactly like the light in my old basement. As I looked down, I yelled and began to wail loudly. Lying in the pool of light beneath the bulb was the mutilated, bloodied corpse of my dear sweet Timothy, the man who I had loved more than anything, the man I'd wanted to marry, the man who always made me feel safe, the man who knew exactly how I liked my coffee and pancakes. His gray eyes were empty as he stared at me. Gone was the perennial warmth and love. His body was covered in deep scratches, and blood soaked his clothes. Oh my God, he was dead. He was dead. Guilt, terror, pain, all kinds of things washed over me. Tears poured down my face, and I yelled incomprehensibly, pleading for someone to help. Without warning, another identical light bulb appeared before the first. My whimpering paused. Then again and again, my eyes widened with terror. Soon hundreds of lights were blooming into existence, like frigid miniature stars. The line of lights made a beeline towards me, with the final bulb flickering to life above my head. I heard the sizzle and hum of its electromagnetic field. I was frozen with terror. I had no idea what to do. My eyes burned with tears, and I squinted. Suddenly there was a loud pop. A bulb had exploded, and I shouted with fright. I gazed down the line of lights and gasped. At first all I saw were the shards of broken glass and the remnants of the broken bulb above. It had been the bulb right at the far end. My gaze shifted. A humanoid silhouette stood beneath the broken bulb. My heart stopped dead. No. I moaned softly, my brain unable to process the terror. Then the next bulb in the line burst, and the man instantaneously stood beneath it, one light closer to me. I screamed with fear and found myself clambering to my feet. I had to get out of here. As I struggled to stand in my panic, I heard another loud pop as the next bulb blew. Then the next one exploded. Suddenly all the bulbs were exploding, one after the other, louder and louder. I saw the silhouette get closer and closer, as swift as a shadow. No, you stay the hell away from me, I screamed as bile forced its way into my mouth. My heart screamed from panic. As I turned, I heard a soft, raspy voice say, "We warned you." Tears flooding down my face, I groped wildly for the basement door. I could feel someone standing right behind me. I yelled in delighted surprise as my hands grasped the door handle. I heaved the door open and ran screaming up the stairs. As I got out of the building, I continued to run and scream as I welcomed the feel of warm, sticky summer air on my skin. I'd never been so happy to see the calm blue sky and the vicious midday sun. I ended up being taken to a hospital by a bunch of cops who'd seen me yelling and crying as I ran down the street. My face, my clothes were covered in dirt. My knees and elbows were scratched, but otherwise I was unharmed. I didn't dare to run and scream as I welcomed the feel of warm, sticky summer air on my skin. I'd never been so happy to see the calm blue sky and the vicious midday sun. I ended up being taken to a hospital by a bunch of cops who'd seen me yelling and crying as I ran down the street. My face, my clothes were covered in dirt. My knees and elbows were scratched, but otherwise I was unharmed. I didn't dare to run and scream as I welcomed the feel of warm, sticky summer air on my skin. I'd never been so happy to see the calm blue sky and the vicious midday sun. I ended up being taken to a hospital by a bunch of cops who'd seen me yelling and
crying as I ran down the street. My face, my clothes were covered in dirt. My knees and elbows were scratched, but otherwise I was unharmed. I didn't dare to run and scream as I welcomed the feel of warm, sticky summer air on my skin. I'd never been so happy to see the calm blue sky and the vicious midday sun. I ended up being taken to a hospital by a bunch of cops who'd seen me yelling and crying as I ran down the street. My face, my clothes were covered in dirt. My knees and elbows were scratched, but otherwise I was unharmed. I didn't dare to run and scream as I welcomed the feel of warm, sticky summer air on my skin. I'd never been so happy to see the calm blue sky and the vicious midday sun. I ended up being taken to a hospital by a bunch of cops who'd seen me yelling and crying as I ran down the street. My face, my clothes were covered in dirt. My knees and elbows were scratched, but otherwise I was unharmed. I didn't dare to run and scream as I welcomed the feel of warm, sticky summer air on my skin. I'd never been so happy to see the calm blue sky and the vicious midday sun.